What an honor to be here. So I get the distinct privilege, I'm so happy that I get to do this, I get to present the award for Student of the Year. I've been at Life West for 2 years now, so I am starting to get a handle on who the students are and your personalities and your contributions, and I couldn't be more excited to give this award to this particular person. For those of you that are students or that you're somewhat connected, you're going to figure out who this is pretty quickly, but I'm going to talk about them anyways because they deserve such phenomenal accolades for all of the amazing work that they've done. I had them as my student in Philosophy 1 class, and I will never forget the moment where I was doing the safety pin cycle and I closed the pin, you know, when you close the pin and everything gets better. And it was first quarter and they're like, wow, I'm like, yes. That's how you know, safety pin. I remember that moment when I learned the safety pin, and that was my first impression. And since then, they just took off. They just absolutely took off. She was the student council secretary last year, and she gave a good speech, I remember. Then she did her year of service, and now she's the vice president of the student council, and I felt like I was beaming pride when she just rocked the stage like a champ. I have never been so proud of watching a student go from point A to point B so fast and at such a great level. She is the president of the League of Chiropractic Women. You all know who I'm talking about now, and you know why she's getting this award, because she is everywhere on campus, constantly serving, making herself better, making the profession better. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so proud to announce the Student of the Year, Ashley Gonzales. There we go. I think we got a picture. Oh, here. Good. Congratulations, Ashley. Okay. Before I start, I also want to mention something about what's happening this evening after the keynote speaker, Dr. Heidi Havik. We have Talk the Tick International Student Competition. The finals will be in this room on this stage. We have 5 competitors, including Barcelona Chiropractic College, New Zealand Chiropractic College, Palmer, Davenport, Life University, Marietta, Georgia, and Life West competing for the English prize. We have 2 competitors competing for the Spanish prize. And you may not know that Talk the Tick started here at Life West 10 years ago by Dr. Eric Van Slooten, who is with us today. I just want to acknowledge Dr. Eric Van Slooten for all the work that he did with Talk the Tick. Thank you. So come on out at 6:15 in between the end of the keynote and the black and white party, and we'll have a good time. Okay, now that that's done, let's begin. I've been the philosophy chair for 2 years now, and the first thing that I do is I have the students read the story of that something. It's the first thing that I have them do. My students in the room, if you've had me for Philosophy 1, this is going to be a bit of a review. I got 25 minutes to talk about stuff that I talk for 20 hours in Philosophy 1. If you're one of my senior students, then you're counting my filler words, making sure I don't say and ah and right. That's my new one, right, so call me on that. It's always an educational opportunity. But if you know me, if you've ever taken a class, you know that I'm big on this science and philosophy, what we call false dichotomy. This science and philosophy, there's this weird idea in our profession that the scientists are over here and the philosophers are over here and they're not talking. And that really irritates me. It really irritates me as a scientist and as a person of logic and reason. I stepped outside the line there. That really irritates me. In fact, there was a time when I was at CMCC taking the Canadian board exams. I'm a Canadian. I come from Toronto. I'm so thankful I went to Life West. But I'm in Toronto, and I'm taking the board exams, and I'm on the break, and I'm giving myself a tour, a self-guided tour, and this student comes up to me from CMCC, and she says, "Oh, are you lost? Are you looking for something?" I said, "No, I'm just taking the board exam." "Oh, what school do you go to?" I said, "Life West," proudly. She says, "Oh, we're evidence-based over here." And my blood boils. I take it super personally. I get offended, back in the day when a lot of things would offend me, but that's really just, I can't handle that. So long story short, I write this talk, I tour on CE, I'm pretty sure that's why I got the job, and I memorized 33 sentences along the way, and now here I am. But the idea of science over here and philosophy over here, that they don't talk to each other, my contention is if you think that science and philosophy are unrelated, then you understand neither. That's my contention. Because the philosophy, thank you, is simply the love of wisdom. We're just asking questions. We want to know more. The philosophy asks questions that the science then answers. That's okay. That's how they do it. People like Einstein and Newton and Galileo and Palmer and all of those people, they were scientists and they were philosophers. What's the big deal? So when I'm at CMCC and they're like, oh, I'm evidence-based over here, what they're saying is that we are not. That's what they're saying. And that's clever marketing. My hat's off to them for figuring out some cool spin on this civil war that we have in our profession. But they're saying evidence-based, well, I take exception to that. So the whole idea is having an evidence-informed approach, having a scientific approach, having a logical approach to the philosophy of chiropractic. That's what we're going to do. Is that right? Good. Philosophy, as I said, is the love of wisdom. It's a web of beliefs. We inherit our beliefs here and there from media, from parents, from teachers, from churches, from all sorts of different places. And if we don't take the opportunity to actually question our beliefs, to process our beliefs, then we might end up with inconsistencies. And if we have inconsistencies, then when we take a piece of information, it doesn't have a nice clean filter where it will come out clean on the other side. We don't have something to run our ideas through if we don't have what we call a cogent web of beliefs. That's the philosopher's mantra. That's the philosopher's objective, is to find consistency in their belief system. And when new information is introduced, we process it with our reason, with our logic, with our induction, our deduction. And if it filters through, then we keep it. And if it doesn't, then we reject it. I wish more people were doing that. Especially people that question the validity of what we do. I wish that was more profound. Speaking more about philosophy, you may or may not know, you probably do, that there are 5 branches of philosophy. 5 branches. Metaphysics, what is out there? Epistemology, how do I know what I know? Things like I think, therefore I am. How do I know that I'm learning stuff? Chiropractic, we talk about induction, we talk about deduction. Someone like Peter Kevorkian will talk about transcendence and connecting to the cosmos, and that's a gateway to information. I subscribe to that as well. How do we know what we know? Those are good philosophical questions. Ethics, what do I do? What is right? Business ethics, chiropractic, applications, politics, what is fair, what is appropriate? This is a political discussion we're having. And it's funny to me, I got an insight of this last week, and it's funny to me when politicians of all people say things like, oh, philosophy has nothing to do with this. Well, politics is a branch of philosophy. Philosophy has everything to do with this. Just because you don't like philosophy doesn't mean you don't have one. Everybody has a philosophy. It's whether or not we've taken the time to define it, to refine it. Choosing not to engage in philosophy is a philosophical engagement nonetheless. So you can't say philosophy has nothing to do with it. It's simply the love of wisdom. Aesthetics, what does it all look like? In chiropractic, we're talking about art, we're talking about technique. All 5 of these branches have chiropractic implications, and that's why I love chiropractic so much as a philosopher, because we go there. We go into metaphysics, we go into epistemology, we go into ethics and aesthetics. We have our politics. It's cool. The rules of logic, when we're talking about logic and we're talking about evidence, we're in this place where we have to be able to be better than the average person out there who seems to be rejecting logic and reason these days. It's crazy. Like, we are evolving in a way where logic and reason and fact is less important than it was 10 years ago. Nuts. But we're academics, we're doctors, we're experts. We have to transcend that and we have to be better. And part of that is recognizing when people use logical fallacies within and outside of the profession. I've already talked about false dichotomies. False dichotomies, projecting mutual exclusivity when alternates actually overlap. What does that mean? You got a circle here for science, you got a circle here for philosophy. They're mutually exclusive, which means they're completely different. false. Science and philosophy are not false. There is an overlap. It's like a Venn diagram. They're mutually inclusive. They're mutually necessary. So don't tell me that science is over here, philosophy is over here, and don't tell me that there's an evidence-based side of the profession that is not a part of the subluxation. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's the straw man fallacy. And as you can see, I've been teaching this for a couple of years now, and in the spirit of diversity and inclusion, I'm thinking straw man, no, straw person. Straw person doesn't have the same ring to it. But then one of my students said straw hat. And I'm like, hey, that's not bad. He's like, oh, I thought that's what it actually was. I'm like, no, well, we're going to use it. We're going to call it the straw hat fallacy now. I'm just going to anoint this fallacy now the straw hat. And what we're talking about is kind of like a scarecrow, right? It's like something made of straw, like a hat or a man or a woman or a person or whatever. And this is like a thing that's easy to beat up. Whereas I'm a person and I can move around and you can't get me as easily as this bag of straw. So what people do, it's clever, and sometimes they do it on purpose, sometimes they don't, is they change an argument to make it an easier, a weaker, easier version to attack. And then they attack the weaker version. That's the straw hat fallacy. So something like, if you don't have RCTs, randomized controlled double-blind trials, this is how evidence-based people like to talk. Oh, it's all about the RCT, it's all about the RCT. You're not evidence-based because you don't have an RCT, a randomized controlled clinical trial, double-blind. That's a fallacy. RCTs is not what makes something evidence-based. RCTs are RCTs. So they take this argument and they weaken it. That's a straw hat. D.D. Palmer was a magnetic healer. So, let me ask you, what do you even think magnetic healing meant back then? Like, it's not what we might think today with EMF and, these bracelets and all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. It just sounds weird, so they attack chiropractic. That's not acceptable. Same with, D.D. Palmer was a quack. Ad hominem, you attack the person, not the argument. Those aren't acceptable. You see that in politics all the time. And if we do it too, we should stop. That's the point. The post hoc fallacy, correlation is not causation, comes up all the time in chiropractic and strokes. Chiropractic does not cause strokes. We talk about that all day in my classes. It's correlated, it's very small, that's why we're talking about it. It's extremely unfortunate, that's why we're talking about it. We want to minimize them, of course, that's why we're talking about it. But they don't cause. There's no cause, there's no causation. It's like 1 in 5.5 million or something like that. Cassidy, 2009, that's my Dan Murphy moment. You like that? Spinal biomechanics, July 27, 2005. Ligament, subfailure, Punjabi and white. Did you guys read the USA Today today? I did. I don't know if he's in the room, but I had to do that. And then, okay, you can't see it here. The biases, the confirmation bias, another thing that we need to be aware of. The confirmation bias. The confirmation bias, that's when you take in evidence, you accept evidence that you already believe in, that supports your belief system, and simultaneously you reject the evidence that goes against it. That's not smart. That goes against the spirit of learning. It's the confirmation bias. It's the double whammy. So the point that I'm bringing these up is if we understand some of the rules of logic and some of the logical fallacies that are being invoked all the time, we may be able to be stronger in using evidence-informed arguments. Logic is evidence. Logic is epistemology. Logic is proof. So talking about evidence-based practices, and I think Dr. Oberstein is going to be talking about this a little bit, evidence-based, evidence-informed, what's the difference? Evidence-informed is the new buzzword. But evidence-based, that's when they try and zing you, like, oh, you're not a scientist, you're not evidence-based. I'm like, okay, well, what do you mean by evidence? What evidence will you accept? Write that down. What evidence will you accept? That's your question. Oh, you're not evidence-based? Well, what evidence will you accept? Well, you don't have a lot of RCTs, randomized controlled double-blind trials, clinical. And you say, yeah, okay, well, anything else count? Nope. Fallacy, straw hat. Total straw hat. I like that this is becoming a thing, right? You guys are going to start talking about straw hats. Because this is the evidence-based pyramid. This is the evidence-based triune here. Talk about perfection of the triune, where patient values and preferences actually count. I want minimally invasive. I want low force. I want high force. I want surgery. I don't want surgery. That counts. Best research evidence, that counts. Of course it counts. We want to use the best research evidence we have. I'm not saying don't use research. Nobody's saying that. But clinical expertise, that counts. By the way, 1895, we're still around. That's because it works. That's evidence. We'd be long gone by now if it didn't work. And is clinical expertise, is clinical experience not almost always ahead of the research? Of course it is. So how's that not evidence-based? How's that not evidence-informed? What evidence will you accept? Because If we are holding each other to the same standards, well, we only want RCTs. We only want randomized controlled double-blind studies. My students will understand this. I joke about parachutes. There is no study ever done that shows the efficacy of parachutes. Did you know that? At least randomized controlled double-blind. So what the study that's never been done is they didn't take, what do we got, 1,000 people here? So you 500 are in a group, I'm not going to tell you which one, and you 500 are going to be in another group. That's blind, right? Because you don't want to know. And you all get a pack. You all get a backpack, and we all go up in the plane. And I'm not going to tell you which is real and which is a sham. And by sham, I mean there's no shoe, but I'm not going to tell you which one. And I'm the person giving you the packs. I don't know who's getting a real pack and who's not, so that's double blind. And go! Still waiting on that study. And the British Medical Journal was cheeky enough to publish that because they're saying, hey, getting a little out of hand here. Getting a little out of hand. Heart transplants, heart surgery at all, double blind, you kidding me? That will never, what I just described is kind of funny. That'll never get through ethics. Heart transplants, that's nothing funny about that. That's serious. They do them. They do bypasses. But there's no double-blind, randomized control. That's not ethical. But they do them. Why do they do them? Because they seem to work. So what's the standard we're holding to? What evidence will you accept? We happen to be a minority in healthcare. And so those in power, they're going to want to hold higher standards for us just to keep us down. Well, can we have the same standard? Because if that's the case, we actually do quite well. What evidence will you accept? That's an important conversation. This is what I was talking about, the randomized controlled double-blind, that little red sliver there. That red sliver is not evidence-based practices. That's a little red sliver, which is it's a good part of the hierarchy of research, which is good, which I don't say we don't need more. Of course we need more. We need epidemiology, which is fancy science word for what is the incidence and prevalence of subluxation, which are two fancy words for how widespread it is and what is my risk of getting one. Working on that would be a nice study. But it's not like the evidence isn't there. It's not like we're not doing evidence-informed practice. False. Here's what Sackett did afterwards. He said, you're ruining it. You're distorting the brand. You're dehumanizing medicine. You're overemphasizing algorithms. It's not just 1 and 1 and 1 is 3, right? Little Beatles reference, when science and philosophy come together. It's a poor fit for multimorbidity. If you're 60 years old or over and you're on a prescription medication, are you probably on more than one? Of course you are. That's the statistic. And then are we studying that? Are we studying the effects? No. Are we studying multiple causes? No, the model doesn't lend itself. This is Sackett, who coined the term evidence-based practices in 1996. This is him and his people 18 years later saying, hey, you're kind of ruining what I was talking about. Marginal gains in clinical outcomes, it's not even working. We need to return to ethics, expertise, and clinical outcomes. So now I'm in a place where I feel, okay, we've been talking about evidence and what evidence informed is and what logic and reason and epistemology and what evidence will you accept. Now I feel like I can talk about this chiropractic textbook. I've been hanging out here and I see that there's a lot of people. There was Peter Kevorkian, Jimmy Nanda. They both flashed the same slide that I'm about to flash about universal intelligence. And here's what happens. There's this universal intelligence, it's in all matter, continually gives to it all its properties and actions, thus maintaining existence. We know that, it's on the test, you can write that. There's two types of people, generally speaking, one that are really into that and one that are not so much into that. I'm sure there's people in between, but you kind of get what I'm saying. You're either into it or you're not. And sometimes, if you're into it, it's just like, hey, moving on, let's go, let's do this. Well, I was one of the ones that wasn't into it. I mean, yeah, you heard me, I wasn't into it. I'm the philosophy chair at Life West now. And I heard universal intelligence and I wasn't into it. I grew up in a non-religious background, son of a mechanical engineer. We did a lot of math and physics and that kind of mathematical, analytical, left brain type of stuff. I read universal intelligence. I said, I can't really hang with that. It sounds a bit too much like God for me. And I don't subscribe. If you do, and you're into that, then you're pumped. I would contend that you're kind of into it. But if you don't, then there's a challenge. So the other thing about logic and deduction and epistemology is the idea when you have a premise, you want to take your premise and you want to use the rules of logic, you want to limit logical fallacies, and whatever steps you take come to conclusions that are accurate as long as you follow the rules. So okay, I get that Stevenson's 33 principles are a logical, deductive approach, but if I'm stuck at the major premise and I just can't get past it, what's the point? Do I throw chiropractic out too? Kind of wanted to. So I'm struggling here. I'm really, really struggling. And I've memorized these principles hundreds of times through pledging to Delta Sigma Chi fraternity in my Philosophy 1 class, and so I've got these verbatim, the double negatives and the commas and the weird language and all of that stuff. I got them, but I never learned them because I didn't like the major premise. It's not too much like God for me. I don't really know. Just kind of like, all right, give me bones, give me muscles, give me nerves, I can handle that. But in these 33 principles, there is a gem. There is an absolute gem for people like me, and maybe for people like you, which is an evidence-informed approach. Missed it. And here's what it is. It's principle number 18. Right in the middle. So deduction and induction, that slide before, where does one start? Deduction is taking your logic from a general premise and coming up with specific conclusions. Induction is looking at specific phenomenon and coming up with general theories and testing those, also called the scientific method. Observations lead to hypothesis, leads to further design study, leads to further observation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Deduction is a chiropractic science. Induction, they said, is the realm of medicine, is what Stevenson said. I'm saying, hold on, Stevie. That's what BJ called him, Stevie. So I'm like, hey, hold on, Stevie. Maybe there's a time and a place for induction. Because let's take an evidence-informed, but let's look for evidence. And he's like, oh, I get what you're saying. Look at my principle. Look at principle 18. I'm like, what do you mean? And he says, okay, you want evidence. Forget your math. Forget your physics. Forget that stuff. Look at biology for a second. Biology? Yeah, biology. Scholars are always asking themselves the question, biologists, what is life? Right? That's a good philosophical question. What is life? Well, the scholars say that there's 5 signs of life. It's these things. They got them from Webster. Not from, the chiropractors didn't make this one up. They said that all living things do the following 5 things. Assimilation, excretion, growth, reproduction, and the hallmark sign, adaptability. The ability to adapt. To take in information, process it, come up with a response. That's cool. And that's biological. We're talking single cells, multi-cells, plants, animals, fungi, you, me, the frog, everyone. 99.999%. I tend to shy away from absolutes, but you get it, right? Like almost all the time. Assimilation, taking in food from the environment. Excretion, removing the wastes. Assimilation, taking food from the environment and turning it into us. Like that's wild. Lettuce becomes cell wall. Protein becomes muscle. Wild. Excrete the rest. We grow, we reproduce, we have the ability to adapt. And you ask yourself, does that sound random or does that sound organized? Organized. If it's happening so much of the time and it rarely doesn't, that sounds consistent, that sounds organized, that sounds repeatable, that sounds predictable, that sounds organized, that sounds intelligent. Oh, science. Okay, tell me more. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, I'll tell you more, because this is me still arguing with Ralph Stevenson. He's like, yeah, you starting to get it? I'm like, yeah, okay, biology, got it. Signs of life. He's like, well, let's extrapolate that to the whole living world, the universe, with fractal mathematics and fractal biology, the Fibonacci sequence. Don't have a ton of time to go into it. Look it up on YouTube. Trip out for days. And just as you watch things spiral and branch and you see all the repeating fractal nature of the universe, repeating, predictable, organized, intelligent. Fibonacci. Super trippy Fibonacci. That one on the left there, that's me looking down on the Sierras flying to Las Vegas. I'd never seen that from a top-down view. I'm like, duh, of course. Makes sense. Put it all together, this is Victoria, British Columbia. Beautiful. And now I'm thinking, okay, if I extrapolate what I saw in biology, if I extrapolate what I see in fractal mathematics and fractal biology, I'm starting to say, okay, I grew up in a random universe. That's what me and the scientists said, it's a random universe. And Ralph Stevenson is saying, no, it's an organized universe. It's an intelligent universe. And I say, prove it. And he says, no, you prove it. I say, you prove it. He says, no, you prove it. This didn't go too far, as you can imagine. And he says, finally, okay, look at biology, look at that. Is that organized or is that random? I'm like, oh, that's kind of organized. It's like, yeah, it is organized. It's predictable. It's repeatable. It's organized. It's intelligent. There is a universal intelligence in this universe. In fact, in case you missed it, we learned this in grade 12, physics class. What do you call it? Call it whatever you want. The electromagnetic spectrum, Einstein's unified field of consciousness, the universe, that which is everything, this electromagnetic wave that is. manifesting at different levels depending on its frequency and vibration. Is it sound? Is it sight? Is it touch? Is it what? We learned all this. This is physics. This is basic physics. So what's the big deal? It's the same intelligence. This is my DeMartini moment. It's the same intelligence that controls biological systems, ecological systems, sociological systems, astrological systems. It does math and physics. My God, if it's intelligent, there's no end to this thing. He goes nuts. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. There is no end to this thing. It's the same intelligence that controls biological systems, ecological systems, sociological systems, etc. The math becomes the physics becomes the chemistry becomes the physiology, the psychology, human behavior, predictable, ecosystems, economics, it's all predictable from this intelligence. Coordinated, harmonious action, harmonious. Chiropractic was founded on tone, right? That's what this intelligence is tone. You feel that? That's cool. Harmonious. Harmonious, yeah, harmonious. Let's talk about the orchestra, right? All of the parts of the body for coordinated action, for mutual benefit. You got the brass, they're like your digestion, or you got your woodwinds, and they're like your respiration. You got your percussion, which is like your cardiovascular. And you got your, okay, now you start, and you go in, and all this, the conductor, the nervous system. Playing harmony, playing beautiful, beautiful ease in the body, ease in the system. Coordinated action, harmony, harmony, harmony. I'm a musician, for those of you that didn't know that. And maybe I brought my guitar this weekend, and maybe we'll play a little bit when we let our hair down tonight. But one of my favorite analogies, comes from the late, great Dr. Andy Roberts, one of my chiropractic mentors. And he talked about the chiropractic adjustment and the harmony that is. And if our job is to let innate run and govern the function of the body at its optimal potential, at a place of ease and coordination, the job is to remove the subluxation, the job of the chiropractor. The goal is to be subluxation free. The result of subluxation free is ease, is harmony, is music. So the adjustment itself, my students know I talk about this. The adjustment, it's the adjustic thrust, universal force, destructive as regards to structural matter. Needs an innate intelligence to process that universal force, to do good things, to restore ease to the body. A little dance between the adjustic thrust and the innate intelligence that receives that and processes it. The adjustic thrust, like the musician plucks the guitar string, leads to the resonance that innate then performs. The goal is to be subluxation free. The goal is to have ease. The goal is to be in a state of balanced tone. The adjustic thrust is the pluck of the string. What happens after that is the music. So let's be strategic and smart about when we put forces in, because it's not about the adjustic thrust, it's about the music in between the notes. You might have seen this on Facebook or wherever. That's the music between the notes. Whatever runs this is that difference between a live person and a dead person. Call it intelligence, call it whatever. Call it that something. Call it that something. They got it. Yeah, you've got that something, 1964. I think you understand. Thank you, everybody.